In this video, I will cover the basics of full bleed printing document setup and setting up crop marks. And for an accompanying quiz for this video, here are 4 probable questions. So you may want to pause and take a look at those. Okay, so let's start with what full bleed printing is. Here's an example. Let's say this is the back of a business card and someone's holding this in their hand. This is the edge of the document. A full bleed means that ink goes all the way to the edge as opposed to a document that has a border around it. And what you have to keep in mind here is that 90+% of the time the paper is white. So in this case, again, ink coverage on the paper all the way to the edge. In this case, the ink stops about 1/4 of an inch shy of the edge of the paper. I'm also working on a video to show you how to mount projects, and in that video I'll show you some examples of what goes wrong if you don't set the bleeds up properly. Let me just show you a document in Illustrator. This document on the left is incorrect because it does not have bleeds. So if you assume that this is the edge of your white paper here, and then you have ink coverage going all the way across here, all the way from top to bottom here. This is set up so that the ink would go just to the edge of the document. Now, when you think of a commercial printing facility, when they would print, let's imagine this is a flyer. When they would print this flyer, they might print as many as like 10 of these on one page, and then they would cut them afterwards. So if this ink were to go on white page, say like 10 times, and then they cut them, what do you think could go wrong when they cut it? So you may want to pause and think about that. Critical thinking. Here's a scan to show you what can go wrong. So this is on a black background. And so we're expecting ink coverage all the way to the edge. Well, all the commercial printer has to be is just a little bit off. And you have this screaming white that shows up in the corner that was unintentional. So the solution is to set the document up this way, that assuming this is the edge of your paper, you actually call for ink to go beyond the edge. So you can see it goes beyond here, it goes beyond here, this whole edge right here, and then anything, an image, a large font, also has to go all the way to the edge because you don't want to take that chance of that sliver of up to 1/8 of an inch showing. And commercial printers are generally allowed a 1/8 of an inch margin of error, and this has actually gone to high courts, and the printers win in these cases. Now, a lot of people get a little discouraged when they hear that and think, what, I have to like make my work that sloppy because the printer might be sloppy? What if I have this photograph and I want it right at this exact point? Well, in short, most of the time when you get a good working relationship with the printer, they'll tell you that they can hold much tighter tolerances than this, but you really have to have that conversation with them and understand what the expectations are. But in general, the expectation is that there can be up to a 1/8 of an inch margin on small work, and even larger, like a 1/4 inch on very large posters and things like that. Now, there's 2 bits of confusion that often come up with this. One is, well, what if I'm not setting up my document for a commercial printing house? I'm just going to print it on my desktop. And let me just show you a quick example of what the difference would be. If you're going to print this on a desktop printer, then what you do is you print it on the full size, and in this example it's an 8.5 by 11 paper, but you need crop marks here to tell you where to cut the document. So first thing, I want to just clarify one thing about the difference between a commercial printer and a desktop printer, and then we'll just take these one step at a time and set them up together. So I'm going to try my best not to confuse you and just say the word printer ever, because in your head you might be thinking, is he talking about the printer in the back of the classroom or on my desk at home? Or is he talking about a commercial printing facility? So I will try to say desktop printer when I mean using the machines that we easily have access to, and commercial printer when we go to a big printing house. Or I might say, you know, your printing person when referring to the person who actually gets that work done for you. Now, a little caveat on that is, what if you don't have a printer in the back of the classroom that you can use, or one on your desktop at home? Then you have to use something in between, which would be like, you know, Kinko's or Staples or Office Depot. But generally, you will set the document up for them just like you would on a desktop printer. If you just Google commercial printing facility, you'll start to see the kind of images, get the idea of how big these facilities and the equipment that they use are. Humongous machines. So in general, you turn your file over to them, they set up their machines, they run out your, you know, 10 or 100,000 copies of the flyer or the magazine or whatever it is that you designed. The desktop printer is, you know, better for just one-offs or printing of a couple documents. And generally you're limited to certain paper sizes like 8.5 by 11, 11 by 17, or, you know, if you're lucky enough to get a nice big Epson printer, maybe 13 by 9 inch, 13 by 19 inch paper. So let's set up a document in Illustrator, and we'll start with the basics. So the first thing I always do, even if it's not going commercial print, just to avoid confusion, is I set up the document to the exact size of the final project. So in this example, we're going to assume that the final project is going to be 7 inches wide by 9 inches tall. So in Adobe Illustrator, we're going to go to File, New. We're going to set this document up in inches. So if this box says anything other than inches, change it to inches. We're going to put in our width of 7 inches, our height of 9 inches, and once it's set to inches, all you have to do is put a 9 in there. You don't have to put IN after it. And then we want to set up the bleed, which the bleed may just be defaulted to 0 for you. And there you just want to make sure that this link is not broken, that it is actually linked. And then you just click this up one notch, and assuming that you're set to inches, it will go to 0.125, which is 1/8 of an inch, and that is the norm in most smaller-ish size printing documents. And then we hit create, and we get our artboard with the 1/8 of an inch bleed all around it, which is indicated by this red line. The red line is the bleed, just the white here represents the white of the paper. Okay, so let's say you start making your design in here, and you, for some reason, make the rookie mistake of forgetting to put in the bleed. I'm doing it this way just so you can see the difference. So this way the ink just goes right to the edge of the page, which, as we know, is wrong. So what we do is we make sure that everything that's supposed to go to the edge of the page actually goes further beyond. So I'm going to hover over the hand tool here, pick the zoom tool, getting closer to this edge, select that particular vector graphic, and then I make it go all the way to the bleed. And I go around and I look at all 4 edges for anything that goes to the edge of the paper, and I just simply make it go further, so that if the commercial printer is a little bit off when they're cutting this to size, we don't have any problems. Now, here is where it gets a little bit trickier. What do you do in the case of another vector graphic that is a lot more critical than just a simple bar or a rule typography? So what you need to do is do the same thing and extend this out, but you're hoping that it gets cut here. So you don't want to just simply move this down. You need to actually extend it out. And that would look something like this. And what I did was I actually made this little piece right here to extend that out. And I'll show you in a separate video how I did that. Now, at this point, if you knew this document was perfect, you had approval from your client, it would be ready to go to the commercial printer and they would know what to do with it. However, graphic design and life in general is rarely that simple. Typically at this point you're going to have to produce a copy for your client. And if it's print-based, they may want to see it printed out. So how do you do that? You can't just have a commercial printer do a one-off for you. The cost would be horrendous. So this is when you use your desktop printer to produce a comp of the work to be able to show the client what that looks like. Well, if you sent this to your desktop printer right now, you're going to get something that looks, well, it depends how your desktop printer interprets it. Some of them will only print what's exactly inside of here. And then you have kind of the same problem that when you're trying to cut it out, you could leave that little sliver of white that we're worried that the commercial printer might do. So the best way to do this, to follow these steps. So we're going to make a rectangle over the top of this document that is the exact size of the piece of paper, not including the bleed. And I always like to get in as close as I can without going too much. But you'll get these little hints that will help you out. And that assumes that under View you have Smart Guides turned on. If not, just go to View and select it to get the check mark next to it. So you take your rectangle tool, and I'm going to leave it with a color, a solid fill on it, just so you can really see what's happening here. And I go right from that edge, see where it says intersect, to this edge of the paper here, not to the bleed. So I should see in that little bottom readout that it says 7 by 9. And after it's done, I can look over here in the properties panel and I should see that it is exactly 7 by 9. Next I go to Effect and Crop Marks. So I'm making sure that this is still selected and only that is selected, and then I go Effect and then Crop Marks. And hopefully you can see this. I'll zoom in a little bit to help, but there are now crop marks there. Rectangle is selected. If you lost the selection, all you have to do is go over here to the very top and grab the selection tool, click on it, and then go down here and bring both the fill and the stroke forward and click on None. We're almost there. We have our crop marks. The only problem is if we sent this to a desktop printer right now, these crop marks would probably get cut off because they're outside of the print area. So we're going to follow these steps here to duplicate this artboard and make it the size of the paper that we are printing on. Before you go to duplicate an artboard, there's a couple things to be aware of. One, you want to make sure if you're using layers, none of them are locked. And if you locked an individual selection, you want to go up to Object and select Unlock All. If it's grayed out, it's not a problem. If it's black like mine is, it means that there is something locked, and when I click on that, it'll unlock the one object that was locked. Okay, so next, you're going to grab the Artboard tool, and you want to make sure you have the Properties panel open. And you're going to, with the Artboard tool, click and drag, which normally would just move the artboard. We want to make sure that this is checked over here, move artwork with artboard. So like I said, if you just click and drag, it just moves the whole thing. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. What we want to do is click and drag and hold the Option key down. Then when we get a fairly good distance away, we're going to release the mouse, then release the Option key. We'll wrap this up in the next video.